You were born Spartan. The good part? You'll be a legendary warrior, respected, feared, basically a human tank. The bad part? Forget about vacations, comfort, or anything remotely peaceful. Your life now is all about lifting swords, sweating, bleeding, and maybe dying gloriously just to end up as a statue later. Subscribe, leave a comment, and let's get into the video. After all, taking it easy is for people born somewhere else. You see, your first achievement isn't simply surviving childbirth in an era with infant mortality rates that would make modern doctors faint. It's surviving your own father's judgment. Welcome to Sparta, where your first day on Earth might also be your last. Unlike other Greek city-states where parents might be, I don't know, happy to see their newborn, Spartan fathers immediately take their squirming bundles of joy to a group of elders at a place called the Lesche. There, you'll be examined like a piece of fruit at the supermarket, except the standards are much higher, and the consequences for bruising are fatal. Just imagine the conversation. This one's leg seems slightly shorter than the other. Toss it off Mount Taygetus. You think I'm exaggerating? That's literally what happened to babies deemed unfit. If you're a girl, you might be thinking you've dodged a bullet. Think again. While your inspection might be slightly less rigorous, emphasis on slightly, you're still expected to be physically perfect because your primary purpose is to birth strong warriors. That's right. Your reproductive capabilities are being assessed while you're still sporting your umbilical cord. If you do pass inspection, congratulations on clearing the first of many hurdles designed to make your life miserable. As a baby girl in Sparta, you'll be raised to be physically strong. Not because the Spartans were early feminists, but because they believed strong women produce strong babies. It's like a breeding program, but with fewer clipboards and more javelin throwing. Meanwhile, your mom is being fed a diet heavy on wine. Not because Spartan mothers needed to take the edge off, though who could blame them, but because Spartans believed wine strengthened the blood. Your first months are spent being bathed in wine rather than water. Yes, wine. Apparently, Spartans thought alcohol baths would temper babies like steel. Unlike the coddling babies received in Athens or other Greek cities, Spartan infants weren't swaddled. The belief was that unrestricted movement would develop better muscles and resilience to temperature changes. Imagine tiny babies doing what essentially amounts to prehistoric CrossFit, while other Greek babies were comfortably wrapped like burritos. You're also not allowed to cry. Seriously, Spartan babies who cried too much were sometimes abandoned, or, in some accounts, tossed off that infamous cliff. If you think this is bad, just wait until we discuss toilet training. Parents were instructed not to fear darkness or solitude, which means you'd frequently be left alone in the dark to build character. Nothing says, welcome to life, like existential terror before you can even speak. Historians have noted that this practice was meant to create fearless warriors, but probably just created excellent liars who pretended not to be afraid. Your early diet would consist primarily of black broth, melazomos, a Spartan specialty made from boiled pig's legs, blood, salt, and vinegar. Modern food critics would give it 0 stars and possibly call the authorities. This nutritional nightmare was supplemented with figs, cheese, and occasionally some meat, if you were lucky. Food wasn't meant to be enjoyed. It was fuel for your warrior body, even before you could properly chew. By age 3, you've survived infection, malnutrition, and possibly several instances of being left outside during bad weather to toughen up. Congratulations! Your reward? More suffering, but now with added public humiliation. Around this age, you'd be presented at a festival called the Amphidromia, where your father would officially accept you into the family. Imagine waiting 3 years to find out if you're actually wanted, and you thought your modern family had commitment issues. For boys, your hair would be cut short except for a small lock at the front. For girls, your hair would be left long, but simple. No fancy Athenian styles for you. Spartan children weren't given elaborate toys or comfort items. Your playthings would be miniature weapons, which is about as Spartan as it gets. Here, child, have a tiny spear to sleep with instead of a teddy bear. While other Greek children might be learning poetry or music, you'd be learning to steal food. Yes, stealing was encouraged, but getting caught was punished severely. The lesson wasn't don't steal, it was don't get caught stealing. This bizarre moral code was designed to create resourceful warriors who could forage during campaigns. So basically, your childhood games included activities that would get you arrested in any modern society. Just imagine being 5 years old and your parents being proud when you successfully steal a cheese wheel without detection. As you reach the age of 7, you begin to realize that your early years, as brutal as they were actually the easy part. For boys, turning 7 means saying goodbye to your family and hello to the Agoge, Sparta's infamous education and training system. This isn't boarding school. It's more like military boot camp designed by sadists with unlimited authority and zero oversight. Girls remain at home, but begin a rigorous physical education program that would make modern Olympic training look like preschool playtime. Both sexes are now expected to exercise naked in public. Yes, naked, in public. Spartan society believed this promoted body pride and eliminated vanity, but it probably just normalized extreme awkwardness and generated lifelong anxiety dreams. Think middle school gym class was bad? Try doing calisthenics in the nude while elders critique your form and older kids wait for opportunities to toughen you up with sanctioned bullying. At this point, you're sleeping on a mat of reeds that you've gathered yourself from the Eurotas River. Not a bed, not a cot. Essentially a pile of river plants that are probably home to several species of insects that see you as an all-you-can-eat buffet. Your blanket is a single thin cloak that you wear year-round, regardless of temperature. Winters in Sparta could drop below freezing, but adding layers was considered weak. Instead, you were expected to generate heat through internal discipline, which is a fancy way of saying shiver silently and pretend you're not cold. Food rations become even more restricted, deliberately keeping you hungry to encourage stealing and develop resourcefulness. The catch? If you're caught stealing, you're not punished for the theft itself, but for your incompetence at getting caught. Punishments typically involve beatings, sometimes to the point of death. This is actually the best part. You could literally die from being bad at stealing food that was deliberately withheld from you. Literacy in Sparta was minimal and primarily focused on military communication. While Athenian kids were learning philosophy, literature, and mathematics, your education consisted of memorizing military commands, Spartan war songs, and basic reading and writing. Just enough to understand orders and not be completely useless in diplomatic situations. The famous Spartan poet Tertius wrote verses glorifying death in battle that you'd be forced to memorize and recite. Sample lyrics include gems about how dying in the front line of battle is beautiful and honorable, while running away is shameful and terrible. It's like being forced to memorize propaganda death metal lyrics before you've even lost all your baby teeth. The highlight of your early childhood education was learning the art of laconic speech, the famously brief, dry Spartan way of talking that valued saying more with less. When Philip II of Macedon threatened, "If I enter Laconia, I will raze Sparta to the ground," the Spartans famously replied with a single word, "if." You're literally being taught to trash talk before you can multiply. Now, if you want to understand why Sparta was truly insane, consider this. The educational system had senior students appointed as supervisors of younger boys. These older boys had near unlimited authority to discipline the younger ones, creating a Lord of the Flies scenario with state approval. Physical abuse wasn't just permitted, it was encouraged as character building. You could be beaten for answering questions incorrectly, for not stealing food successfully, for showing any emotion considered weak, or simply because an older boy felt like it. Every year during the festival of Artemis Orthia, boys were flogged at the altar, sometimes to death, while their parents watched and encouraged them not to cry out. This wasn't punishment for wrongdoing. It was a contest to see who could endure the most pain without making a sound. Winners received honor. Losers received shame, if they survived at all. And this, dear friends, is what passed for character education in Sparta. Your education in Sparta continues to be a masterclass in state-sanctioned torture disguised as character building. By age 12, You've been stripped of any comforts that might remind you of normal childhood. Your head is now shaved, you walk barefoot regardless of weather, and you've learned to suppress natural human reactions like laughing, crying, or complaining. If you think modern schools with their standardized testing and cafeteria food are rough, imagine a system where the metric for success is how silently you can endure being whipped until you bleed. The physical training intensifies to levels that would make modern athletic trainers call Child Protective Services. Your day begins before dawn with exercises, wrestling, and various combat drills, all performed while fasting. Breakfast? That's for wimps, or as Spartans would say, everyone else in Greece. Your diet is so limited that you're in a constant state of hunger, not by accident, but by design. The Spartan leadership believed hunger sharpened the mind and body, though modern nutritionists might suggest it actually just leads to stunted growth and cognitive impairment. Just imagine trying to solve complex battle strategies while your stomach sounds like two raccoons fighting in a metal trash can. Academic education, as other Greeks understood it, barely exists in your world. While Athenian youth discuss philosophy with Socrates, you're learning how many different ways you can kill someone with a short sword. Mathematics? Only enough to count how many enemies you've slain or how many survive in your unit. Literature? Limited to war poems and stories of Spartan glory that make modern propaganda look subtle. Music consists solely of marching songs and war chants. No lullabies or love songs for you. You do, however, get extensive training in choral dance, which might sound surprisingly artistic until you realize it's primarily to teach unit cohesion and synchronization for battlefield movements. It's basically military drill choreography set to music, and if you miss a step, you're not getting a gentle correction from a dance instructor. You're getting beaten with a wooden staff. The most ironic part? Despite creating one of history's most fearsome military machines, Spartans were also famous for their dancing. That's right, the same people who threw imperfect babies off cliffs were known throughout Greece for their excellent rhythm and coordination. Life is full of contradictions, especially in Sparta. The socialization aspect of your education is equally charming. Older boys regularly organize fights between younger boys, forcing them to bite, scratch, and pummel each other until one surrenders or can't continue. These aren't regulated boxing matches with referees and weight classes. They're glorified street fights designed to identify the strongest and most ruthless among you. Bullying isn't just tolerated, it's institutionalized. If you're not being physically assaulted, you're being verbally humiliated. Older boys and adult supervisors constantly hurl insults designed to either harden you emotionally or break you completely. Their creative psychological warfare includes tasks specifically designed for failure, followed by punishment for that inevitable failure. You think modern hazing is bad? In Sparta, it was the entire educational philosophy. The system creates a perfect cycle of abuse. Today's victims become tomorrow's abusers, all justified as tradition and building strong warriors. Spoiler: this won't end well for your psychological development, but that's hardly a concern in a society where the concept of mental health consisted of stop complaining or I'll give you something to complain about. Communication skills in Sparta deserve special mention. Remember that famous Spartan brevity? It's not just a cultural preference. It's drilled into you through, surprise, physical punishment. Boys who gave long-winded answers were beaten until they learned to express themselves concisely. The goal was to create warriors who could deliver clear, decisive communications in battle. But the side effect was a society of people terrible at small talk. Imagine a first date in Sparta. You look nice. Yes. End of conversation. You also learn the art of clever retorts. Though clever, in Spartan terms, means brutally cutting and often cruel. When a visitor once remarked on the high walls of another Greek city and asked where Sparta's walls were, a Spartan pointed to his fellow citizens and said, "These are Sparta's walls." Cool line, but it conveniently ignores the fact that Sparta was eventually conquered partly because, plot twist, having actual walls might have been useful. The education system teaches you to be proud of your suffering, to the point where you genuinely believe that being able to endure more pain than others makes you superior. This isn't just drinking the Kool-Aid. It's making the Kool-Aid drinking it, and then beating up anyone who doesn't agree it's delicious. By age 15, physical training reaches levels that would make modern sports medicine experts write concerned journal articles. Wrestling becomes increasingly violent, with few rules beyond don't kill your opponent unless instructed to do so. Boxing involves no gloves, just hardened leather straps wrapped around your hands to make the punches more damaging. Pancration, a brutal combination of wrestling and boxing where almost anything goes, becomes a regular part of your training. The only rules? No eye gouging or biting. Everything else is fair game. Weapons training intensifies with the introduction of the dory, spear, xiphos, short sword, and aspes shield, the iconic equipment of a Spartan warrior. The shield, weighing approximately 16 pounds, becomes your constant companion, and you're taught that returning without it is the ultimate disgrace. As the famous Spartan mother's saying goes, come back with your shield or on it. Translation, return victorious or dead. There is no third option. Just imagine other Greek mothers giving their sons packed lunches and reminders to be polite, while Spartan mothers are basically saying, victory or death, sweetie. The notoriously brutal cryptia begins around age 18 for the most promising students. This charming practice involves being sent into the countryside with nothing but a knife and your wits. Your mission? Hunt and kill helots, Sparta's slave class, who are out after curfew or seem troublesome. That's right. Your final exam is essentially state-sanctioned murder of unarmed civilians. The cryptia served multiple purposes, training in stealth and survival, culling the helot population to prevent rebellion, and, most importantly, crossing a moral line that forever separates you from normal society. Once you've killed for the state outside of battlefield conditions, you're fully indoctrinated. It's like a street gang initiation, but run by the government. The psychological impact of turning teenagers into assassins? Not a concern. PTSD? Never heard of it. Moral qualms about killing unarmed people? That's just weakness talking. The Spartan system doesn't just train warriors. It creates human weapons with unwavering loyalty to the state. The most disturbing part? It worked remarkably well for centuries, creating soldiers so fearsome that their reputation alone could deter enemies. If you survive the eclogue, you're not just physically formidable. You're psychologically conditioned to find violence normal and death preferable to dishonor. Your education culminates at age 20 with a final test that determine whether you become a full Spartan citizen, Spartiate. These tests assess everything from physical prowess to loyalty to mental fortitude. Failure means disgrace and relegation to a lower social class, bringing shame to your family for generations. The pressure is immense, and the standards are nearly impossible. Only the most exceptional students, or those most thoroughly broken and rebuilt in Sparta's image, succeed. If you pass, congratulations. Your reward for surviving 2 decades of systematic abuse? The privilege of joining the Syssitia communal mess, where you'll dine on that delicious black broth for the rest of your life while continuing military training. You'll also contribute financially to these meals, and failure to contribute results in loss of citizenship. So after all that training, you can still lose everything if you can't afford dinner dues. If you think this is bad, just wait until you hear about Spartan retirement. Spoiler alert, there isn't one. You're a soldier until you're physically incapable or dead, whichever comes first. And in a society that despises weakness, guess how well they treat the elderly or injured. Now, let's talk about your daily life in Sparta, which makes modern minimalism look extravagant. Your day begins before dawn, usually with a cold plunge in the Eurotas River. Not because Spartans discovered the health benefits of cold therapy, but because comfort was considered decadent. Breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of a barley cake so dry and tasteless it makes modern military rations look like gourmet cuisine. Your morning is filled with military exercises, drills, and weapons training. There's no weekend in Sparta, no personal time, and certainly no concept of work-life balance. Every aspect of your existence serves the state's military needs. Even your limited leisure time is militarized, with competitive sports designed to hone combat skills rather than for enjoyment. Fun fact: Spartans did compete in the Olympic Games and often won, but they were forbidden from competing professionally or training specifically for events. Their regular military training was considered sufficient preparation, which is either impressive or terrifying, depending on your perspective. Imagine being so physically conditioned that Olympic training would be a step down in intensity. Your clothing continues to be minimal. That single cloak, called a tribon, regardless of weather, and usually nothing underneath. Spartan fashion was so basic that laconic dressing became a term for extreme simplicity. No jewelry, no adornments, no personal expression through appearance. Long hair for men was the only exception, becoming a Spartan trademark once you reached warrior status. The reasoning? It made Spartans look more terrifying in battle and could be arranged nicely under helmets. It also served the practical purpose of cushioning blows to the head, though modern neurologists might suggest a better solution would be maybe don't get hit in the head so much. Personal hygiene was surprisingly important, not for comfort, but for military efficiency. Disease could weaken the army. However, bathing was done in cold water because of course it was. Warm baths were considered Persian decadence. And if there's one thing Spartans hated more than weakness, it was anything associated with their enemies. You wouldn't want to be called Persian lover just because you enjoyed water that didn't give you hypothermia. Meals are taken communally in your syssitia, the mess unit of about 15 men who become your closest companions. Partly by choice, mostly by necessity. These aren't just dining clubs. They're your primary social unit, military squad, and political voting bloc all in one. Membership requires unanimous approval from existing members, creating an environment where conformity is literally necessary for survival. The food remains consistently terrible, with the infamous black broth serving as the main course almost daily. When a visitor from Sybaris, a city known for luxury, tasted this broth, he reportedly said, "Now I understand why Spartans don't fear death." The portion sizes are intentionally inadequate, encouraging you to supplement your diet through hunting or, more commonly, stealing. Remember those stealing skills you developed as a child? They continue to come in handy, as the state deliberately maintains food scarcity to keep warriors resourceful and prevent comfort. The irony of creating a society so focused on strength while simultaneously undernourishing its citizens is apparently lost on Spartan leadership. Your living quarters would make a modern minimalist have an existential crisis. You don't have a home in the conventional sense, you have a barracks. Personal possessions are limited to your weapons, shield, cloak, and perhaps a small knife for utility purposes. Decorations? Unnecessary. Comfort? Undesirable. Privacy? Non-existent. You sleep on that same reed mat you've used since childhood, now perhaps slightly larger, but no more comfortable. The Spartan aversion to luxury extended to architecture. Their buildings were notoriously plain, their furniture rudimentary. When King Agesilaus was once invited to see a ceiling built from exquisitely carved square beams, he mockingly asked the host whether trees in their region naturally grew square. This from a culture where the men had long, flowing hair, but couldn't tolerate decorative woodwork. Talk about selective aesthetics. Living spaces are designed for functionality only, with no consideration for comfort or pleasure. The entire city of Sparta lacked the impressive temples, theaters, and public buildings that characterized other Greek cities. Visitors often remarked that Sparta looked more like a collection of villages than a powerful city-state, which was partly intentional. Spartans believed ostentation created weakness. It's also why they used iron rods as currency instead of gold or silver coins like other Greeks. These iron rods were deliberately made so large and heavy that carrying significant wealth was physically burdensome, discouraging accumulation of riches. Imagine trying to buy a house with what amounts to a bundle of rebar. The daily schedule is rigidly structured around military training, with almost no time allocated for personal pursuits. Literature, art, philosophy, and other cultural activities that flourished in Athens were actively discouraged in Sparta. The only poetry you're exposed to glorifies warfare and Spartan values. The only music accompanies military drills or religious ceremonies. This cultural austerity was so complete that despite Sparta's historical importance, they left almost no art, literature, or architecture for future generations to study. While Athens gave the world Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Sparta gave us, well, the movie 300 and a fitness program brand. The Spartans were so focused on being the best warriors that they neglected to leave any significant cultural legacy beyond their military reputation. It's like being the high school quarterback who peaks at 18. Impressive in the moment, but limited in lasting impact. The most notable Spartan contribution to world culture might be the word laconic itself, meaning concise to the point of bluntness. Even their cultural legacy is minimalist. The supreme irony is that we know most details about Spartan life not from Spartans themselves, but from their more literate neighbors who actually wrote things down. Your rare moments of leisure are spent in highly regulated activities. Hunting is encouraged as it hones skills useful for warfare. Music and dance are permitted, but only in forms that reinforce military values or religious observances. Drinking alcohol is allowed during certain festivals and religious events, but public drunkenness is severely punished. The Spartans were notorious for getting their helots, slaves, drunk, and parading them before young men as object lessons in the disgrace of losing control. Nothing says fun cultural practice like forcing an oppressed class to become intoxicated so you can mock them as a teaching tool. Games and sports always have military applications. Racing in armor, wrestling, and combat simulations. There's no Spartan equivalent of just kicking back and relaxing. Even socializing is primarily done within your syssitia, and conversations tend to center around military matters, state affairs, or evaluating the performance of younger warriors. Gossip and idle talk are discouraged through that famously laconic speech ethos. The constant vigilance and self-discipline never end, creating a psychological state modern therapists would probably diagnose as chronic stress with comorbid anxiety. But in Sparta, this perpetual state of alertness and restraint isn't considered a disorder. It's the desired outcome of your education and lifestyle. You're not just living in Sparta, you're Sparta down to your core. And if that sounds exhausting, well, that's because it absolutely is. Your work life in Sparta is refreshingly straightforward. Your job is war, preparing for war, or maintaining readiness for war. Unlike other Greek city-states where citizens might be merchants, artisans, philosophers, or farmers, Sparta operates on a single career system. Congratulations! Your career path was chosen before birth, with zero input from you. The Spartan professional trajectory offers limited advancement opportunities but excellent job security, assuming you don't die in battle, which, spoiler alert, many do. As a full Spartan citizen, you're prohibited from engaging in trade, commerce, or manual labor. These activities are considered beneath you and are handled by perioikoi, free non-citizens, and helots, state-owned serfs who make up roughly 90% of the population. Your sole focus is military service, which begins formally at age 20 and continues until age 60. That's right, a 40-year career with no possibility of early retirement, career change, or even a sabbatical. Modern workers complaining about their 9-to-5 jobs might reconsider after learning about the Spartan work schedule, which is essentially 5 to 9, 7 days a week, for decades. Your professional responsibilities center around maintaining Sparta's military supremacy and, perhaps more crucially, preventing helot rebellions. The helots outnumber Spartans by a ratio that historians estimate between 7 to 1 and 20 to 1, creating a perpetual state of tension. Unlike chattel slavery and other societies, helots aren't individually owned, but belong to the state, working land assigned to Spartan citizens. They're essentially an enslaved ethnic group, the conquered people of Messenia and Laconia. Every year, Sparta's ephors, elected officials, formally declare war on the helots, making their killing technically legal and religiously sanctioned. This isn't just a ceremonial declaration. Remember that Krypteia training where you hunted helots? That continues as part of your professional duties. Just imagine your workplace initiating an annual. It's officially legal to kill the support staff day. Unsurprisingly, this creates a society in perpetual fear of uprising, meaning you're not just a soldier against external enemies, but also an enforcer against internal threats. Your job description includes terrorizing the very people who produce your food. It's like being both a soldier and a secret police officer, with none of the charming work-life balance of either profession. The famous Spartan phalanx formation is your primary workplace, and your position within it is determined by your status and abilities. The phalanx is a tightly packed rectangular military formation, typically 8 ranks deep, where each warrior overlaps a shield with the next, creating an impenetrable wall of bronze shields and protruding spears. Your equipment: that dory spear, Zipho's short sword, bronze helmet, bronze greaves, red cloak, and most importantly, your Aspie shield becomes essentially your work uniform. This shield deserves special attention. Weighing about 16 pounds, curved to protect the body, and large enough to cover from chin to knee, it's designed to protect not just you, but also the man to your left. This creates a system where your survival depends on your neighbor not abandoning his post, and vice versa. The shield's design physically enforces unit cohesion. You literally cannot flee without exposing your brothers in arms to danger. This explains the famous Spartan mother's line to her son: "Return with your shield or on it." Leaving your shield behind was the ultimate proof of desertion and brought permanent disgrace. In modern terms, it would be like abandoning your company's server with all customer data unlocked in a public space. Career suicide, but with actual suicide as the socially preferred alternative. The professional hierarchy in Sparta is deceptively simple. At the top are 2 hereditary kings who serve as military leaders and religious figures. Below them are 5 annually elected ephors who handle day-to-day governance and can even bring charges against the kings. Next is the Gerousia, a council of 28 elders, plus the 2 kings, who must be over 60 years old, forming a senate of sorts. Then come the homoioi, equals, full Spartan citizens like yourself who have completed the agoge and maintain their contribution to the Syssitia. The military itself has various ranks and specialized units, with promotion based primarily on merit and battlefield performance rather than social connections. This meritocratic approach to military advancement is perhaps the most progressive aspect of Spartan society, though progressive is doing a lot of heavy lifting in a system that throws imperfect babies off cliffs. The professional expectations are straightforward: absolute obedience to superiors, unwavering courage in battle, and maintaining physical excellence at all times. Performance reviews aren't conducted in comfortable office settings with constructive feedback forms. They happen on the battlefield, where failure might mean death, or in public scrutiny, where failure means social disgrace, potentially worse than death. Your work-life balance is non-existent because, in Sparta, work is life. The concept of separating professional and personal identities would seem bizarre to Spartans. Even when not actively campaigning, your days are filled with training exercises, weapons maintenance, and physical conditioning. The only significant career break comes when you're assigned to train younger boys in the agoge, passing along both skills and the psychological conditioning that perpetuates the system. This isn't a relaxing change of pace. It's arguably more stressful, as failure to properly train the next generation reflects poorly on you. Imagine being held personally responsible if your company's interns turn out mediocre. Now imagine that responsibility in a culture where mediocrity is considered worse than death. The stress is constant, but complaining about stress is unthinkable. Physical or mental breakdown due to this pressure doesn't elicit sympathy or medical intervention. It brings shame and potentially loss of citizenship status. Employee assistance programs are non-existent. Your options are cope or be disgraced. Employee benefits, however, do exist in the form of a guaranteed income from your assigned land, worked by helots, communal meals, and the highest social status in Spartan society. The catch? These benefits last only as long as you maintain perfect adherence to Spartan ideals. Workplace hazards in your Spartan career are numerous and severe. Beyond the obvious risks of combat, death, dismemberment, disfigurement, you face the constant threat of social disgrace for any perceived cowardice or weakness. Physical injuries are problematic not just for their immediate effects, but for the potential loss of status if they impair your fighting ability. Workplace safety regulations are non-existent. OSHA would have an absolute field day in ancient Sparta. There's no workers' compensation, no disability accommodation, and certainly no concept of workplace harassment protections. Harassment is basically the management style. Medical care is rudimentary at best, with battlefield medicine limited to extracting arrowheads and basic wound treatment. Infection kills more warriors than enemy weapons, and rehabilitation protocols consist primarily of walk it off or die with dignity. Psychological support for combat trauma doesn't exist in any formal sense, though the shared experiences within your syssitia provide some form of peer support. The Spartan approach to what we now call PTSD is essentially having nightmares about battle, have more battles until it seems normal. It's exposure therapy taken to a psychologically devastating extreme. Career advancement in Sparta is measured primarily through battlefield glory and adherence to Spartan values. Exceptional performance might earn you a position as a commander, a spot in the elite Hippias, the 300-man Royal Guard, not to be confused with cavalry despite the name, or eventually a seat on the Gerousia once you reach the retirement age of 60. Political offices like Ephor are theoretically open to all full citizens, though in practice, they tend to go to those from more prominent families with distinguished military records. The ultimate career achievement is a glorious death in battle, preferably while performing heroic deeds worthy of remembrance in Spartan oral tradition. That's right, the pinnacle of professional success in Sparta is a good death rather than a good life. Imagine a modern performance review where died impressively while increasing quarterly profits is the highest possible rating. This glorification of battlefield death creates a professional environment where survival might actually damage your reputation if achieved through anything perceivable as caution or self-preservation. The ideal Spartan career trajectory ends with your name being remembered, your body carried home on your shield, and your sons aspiring to an equally glorious death. If this sounds psychologically troubling, that's because it absolutely is by any modern standard of mental health. Professional development in Sparta is straightforward and one-dimensional. Become better at warfare. There are no conferences to attend, no certifications to earn, no lateral moves into different departments. Your continuing education consists of constant drilling, physical conditioning, and actual combat experience. The only networking events are military campaigns and religious festivals, both of which revolve around reinforcing Spartan military ideology. There's no concept of finding your passion or work that fulfills you. Your assigned passion is excellence in battle, and questioning this assignment is unthinkable. Innovation and creative thinking are generally discouraged, except in tactical battlefield situations where adaptation might lead to victory. The Spartan professional environment actively resists change, viewing traditional methods as proven and therefore superior. This resistance to innovation eventually becomes one of Sparta's greatest weaknesses, as their military tactics and technology stagnate while other Greek states evolve. It's like refusing to update your company's software for 200 years while competitors adopt new technology. Eventually, your competitive advantage disappears no matter how disciplined your employees are. The work culture in your Spartan profession is defined by extreme conformity, with virtually no tolerance for individualism. Every aspect of your professional identity is subordinated to the collective good of Sparta. Personal ambition is acceptable only when it serves state interests, and self-promotion is deeply frowned upon. The famous Spartan General Brasidas was an exception who gained significant personal fame, but even he was careful to always frame his accomplishments as service to Sparta rather than personal glory. Workplace communication follows that famous laconic style, brief, direct, and often cutting. There's no diplomatic phrasing of criticism, no sandwich method of feedback, just blunt assessment of performance. Praise is rare and understated. Criticism is public and harsh. The professional ethic emphasizes results over process, courage over caution, and death before dishonor. In modern corporate terms, it's a toxic workplace culture that somehow achieves exceptional results until it doesn't. The system works brilliantly for producing unmatched infantry for specific types of warfare, but fails to adapt when circumstances change. It's like having a company that makes the world's best typewriters, but refuses to acknowledge the invention of computers. Your professional responsibilities extend beyond just fighting. All Spartan citizens are expected to participate in the assembly appella, voting on important matters by shouting rather than by ballot. Yes, shouting. The volume of the crowd determines the outcome. It's less one person, one vote, and more loudest group wins, which explains a lot about Spartan politics. You're also expected to marry and produce children. This isn't a personal life choice, but a civic duty. Spartan men who remained unmarried past a certain age faced legal penalties and public mockery. Your reproductive success is considered part of your contribution to the state. If you think modern performance metrics are intrusive, imagine your annual review, including an assessment of your reproductive output. Failed to produce offspring this year? That's going on your permanent record. The professional pressure extends to every aspect of life, creating a system where work-life balance isn't just discouraged. It's conceptually impossible. There is no life separate from your role as a Spartan warrior citizen. Even your death is evaluated in professional terms. Did you die appropriately, bringing honor to Sparta? If not, your legacy suffers regardless of your lifetime achievements. It's the ultimate high-pressure career where even your final exit is subject to performance review. The most ironic aspect of the Spartan professional system is that despite creating the ancient world's most formidable military machine, Sparta's actual strategic accomplishments are somewhat limited. Yes, they defeated Athens in the Peloponnesian War with substantial Persian financial support, but their moment of greatest glory, the Battle of Thermopylae, was technically a defeat, albeit an inspiring one. Their victory at Plataea was more decisive, but less celebrated in popular culture. Sparta's professional military focus created excellent warriors, but poor occupiers, administrators, or diplomats. They won battles, but struggled to capitalize on victories, lacking the political and diplomatic infrastructure to transform military success into lasting power. It's like having an amazing sales team that closes deals, but terrible customer service that loses all the clients. The professional tunnel vision that made Spartans exceptional on the battlefield ultimately contributed to their decline as a power. By focusing exclusively on traditional hoplite warfare, they failed to adapt to changes in military technology and tactics. The Sacred Band of Thebes eventually defeated Sparta's previously invincible forces at Leuctra in 371 BCE, effectively ending Spartan military supremacy. It turns out that having a single-minded professional focus is great until the profession itself becomes obsolete. But at least they looked really cool doing it, which counts for something in the historical legacy department. When it comes to relationships in Sparta, you'll find they're about as warm and fuzzy as that black broth you've been choking down your entire life. Marriage in Sparta isn't a romantic affair based on personal choice or emotional connection. It's essentially a state-supervised breeding program with slightly better catering. Men typically marry around age 30 after a decade of military service, while women usually marry between 18 to 20. The age gap ensures men are fully indoctrinated into Spartan values before taking on family responsibilities, and that women are at peak physical condition for childbearing. The actual marriage ceremony involves the bride having her head shaved, being dressed in male clothing, and left alone in a dark room. The groom then sneaks in, consummates the marriage, and returns to his barracks. That's right, you don't even get a honeymoon night, just a quick visit before returning to your all-male living quarters. Romantic, isn't it? If Hallmark made cards for Spartan weddings, they'd read "Congratulations on your state-approved genetic merger," or "May your reproductive output strengthen Sparta." Just imagine modern dating apps with profile criteria like "must be willing to have head shaved and wear men's clothing for first date." or looking for someone to meet briefly in the dark and then not live with. Your married life continues this charming pattern. As a Spartan man, you don't live with your wife, but remain in the barracks with your Sisisha. You're allowed only brief, secret visits to your wife, sneaking into her residence at night and leaving before dawn. This arrangement continues for years, with some sources suggesting men didn't properly live with their wives until completing active military service around age 45 to 50. The reasoning behind this bizarre arrangement? Partly to maintain primary loyalty to the state rather than family, partly to increase sexual tension and thus reproductive enthusiasm, seriously, and partly to make each encounter feel like an illicit assignation rather than a domestic obligation. The system creates marriages where spouses might barely know each other beyond their reproductive interactions. Some modern couples complain about not having enough quality time together. Spartan couples would consider any time together in daylight to be an exotic luxury. The wedding night tradition of the bride having her head shaved and wearing men's clothing has been interpreted various ways by historians. But the most common explanation is that it was meant to ease the transition from men accustomed only to male company. Nothing says healthy attitude toward sexuality like needing your bride to pretend to be a man on your wedding night. Spartan women enjoyed significantly more freedom and authority than women in other Greek city-states, though freedom here is relative to the extremely restrictive norms elsewhere. While Athenian women were largely confined to the home and had minimal property rights, Spartan women could own and inherit land, receive formal education, participate in sports, and speak publicly. This wasn't due to early feminist principles, but practical necessity. With men absent from military service, women needed authority to manage estates and resources. Spartan women received rigorous physical training, participating in athletics, including wrestling, running, javelin throwing, and discus. This wasn't for their personal development, but to ensure they produced healthy offspring, essentially treating women as athletic broodmares. The infamous Spartan Queen Gorgo, when asked by an Athenian woman why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, reportedly answered, "Because we're the only ones who give birth to men." This quote perfectly encapsulates the paradox of Spartan gender relations. Women had unusual power, but were still valued primarily for reproductive purposes. Imagine a workplace where women can be CEOs, but their performance reviews focus exclusively on how many future employees they've produced. Relationships between parents and children in Sparta were subordinated to state interests. Children weren't raised primarily by their biological parents, but by the community as a whole, with boys removed for the agoge at age 7. The emotional bonds that form the core of family life in most societies were deliberately weakened to strengthen loyalty to the state. Fathers were expected to take an interest in their sons' progress in the agoge, but more as evaluators than nurturers. Mothers were famously expected to prioritize civic virtue over maternal instinct, as in the famous saying, "Return with your shield or on it." One Spartan mother reportedly killed her son who had fled battle, declaring she had not given birth to a son who couldn't serve Sparta. Whether this actually happened or is propaganda, it illustrates the expected prioritization of state over family bonds. Modern parents worry about finding the right balance between being strict and being nurturing. Spartan parenting eliminated this dilemma by removing the nurturing option entirely. Your children aren't really yours in Sparta. They belong to the state, and your role is essentially quality control. If you think modern helicopter parents are bad, imagine parents whose primary concern is whether their child has sufficient bloodlust and pain tolerance. Friendships in Sparta centered primarily around your Sisisha, the mess group of approximately 15 men with whom you dine and fight. These bonds were exceptionally strong, forged through shared hardship, mutual dependence in battle, and daily interaction. The intensity of these relationships was encouraged, creating units where men would quite literally die for each other. While other Greeks might form friendships based on shared intellectual interests, artistic pursuits, or commercial ventures, Spartan friendships were almost exclusively built on shared military experience and values. The Spartan system also institutionalized a form of mentorship where older men would take special interest in younger warriors, guiding their development. This relationship, while primarily educational and military in nature, could have romantic or sexual dimensions that were socially accepted within certain boundaries. Same-sex relationships between warriors were common throughout ancient Greece, but took on particular significance in Sparta's military culture, where they were thought to enhance unit cohesion and battlefield courage. Men would fight more fiercely to impress their lovers or to protect them in battle. If modern team-building exercises seem awkward, imagine an office where romantic relationships between mentors and men's are actively encouraged to improve departmental performance. Workplace harassment policies would need significant revision. Social life outside your immediate military unit was limited but did exist, primarily during religious festivals and certain communal activities. Sparta had numerous religious celebrations where the strict military discipline relaxed somewhat, allowing for music, dance, athletic competitions, and slightly more indulgent meals. These festivals provided rare opportunities for men and women to interact publicly, for displays of artistic talent, within strict traditional boundaries, and for temporary respite from the rigors of military life. However, even these occasions maintained distinctly Spartan characteristics. Athletic competitions were brutally physical. Dances often mimicked combat movements, and excessive indulgence remained taboo. The Gymnopedia Festival, for example, featured naked dancing and exercises to honor Apollo, combined with commemorations of the fallen from the Battle of Thermopylae. Even your parties are militarized in Sparta. Imagine a modern office party where everyone has to demonstrate their quarterly sales figures through interpretive dance, while supervisors evaluate their form and dedication. That's essentially a Spartan festival, performance evaluation barely disguised as celebration. The relationship between Spartans and Helots deserves special attention, as it fundamentally shaped Spartan society. This wasn't merely slavery as practiced elsewhere in the ancient world, but a system closer to apartheid or state serfdom, with an entire conquered population, primarily Messenians, forced to work Spartan lands. Helots vastly outnumbered Spartans, creating a constant fear of rebellion that influenced nearly every aspect of Spartan life and social relations. Helots were ritually humiliated, forced to wear distinctive clothing, receive a set number of lashes annually regardless of behavior, and compelled to perform degrading songs and dances. They could be killed by Spartans with impunity, particularly during the Crackling, where young Spartans murdered Helots as part of their training. Yet despite this brutality, Sparta depended entirely on Helot labor to maintain its military society. Without Helots working the land, Spartans couldn't devote themselves exclusively to warfare. It's like having a company where executives spend all their time in leadership retreats while the abused interns do all the actual work that keeps the business running. The relationship was characterized by extraordinary psychological complexity, absolute dependence combined with absolute dominance, creating a social dynamic of perpetual tension that required increasingly harsh measures to maintain. It's worth noting that this relationship ultimately proved unsustainable, with Helot rebellions playing a significant role in Sparta's eventual decline. Foreign relations for individual Spartans were severely limited by the practice of xenolasia, the expulsion of foreigners from Spartan territory and restrictions on Spartan travel abroad. This policy, aimed at preventing the corruption of Spartan values by outside influences, created a society largely isolated from the broader cultural and intellectual developments of the Greek world. Spartans viewed most other Greeks with a mixture of superiority and suspicion, considering them soft and decadent despite their cultural achievements. Diplomatic relations existed out of necessity, and Sparta formed alliances, most notably the Peloponnesian League, but these were primarily military in nature rather than cultural or commercial. Individual friendships with non-Spartans were discouraged and viewed with suspicion. The few Spartans who developed significant connections with outsiders, like King Agesilaus II with the Persian satrap Pharnabazus, were exceptional cases usually justified by military or strategic necessity. This isolation eventually became a critical weakness, as Sparta failed to adapt to changing military and political realities beyond its borders. It's like a company that refuses to attend industry conferences, doesn't read trade publications, and bans employees from having LinkedIn profiles, then wonders why competitors are suddenly outperforming them with innovative approaches they've never heard of. The social hierarchy within Sparta created relationships defined by strictly enforced status differences. At the top were the homoioi, equals, full citizens who had completed the agoge and maintained their contributions to their syssitia. Below them were groups like the mothakes, sons of Spartans who couldn't afford the syssitia contributions, neodomodius, freed helots, periokaphrenon citizens who handled trade and crafts, and at the bottom, the helots. Movement between these groups was rare, but possible in exceptional cases. Particularly talented mothakes might be sponsored by wealthy Spartans, and occasionally helots who performed extraordinary service might be freed. This rigid social stratification created a society where every interaction was colored by status considerations, with behavioral expectations and permissible relationships strictly defined by one's position. Modern complaints about office politics and corporate hierarchies pale in comparison to a system where your birth status determines virtually every aspect of your life, with minimal opportunity for advancement regardless of talent or effort. The ultimate irony of Spartan society is that a state founded on the principle of equality among its warrior class was built upon one of history's most extreme systems of inequality for everyone else. It's like a company that proudly advertises all executives are treated exactly the same, while maintaining sweatshop conditions for regular employees. If Sparta had corporate values posted on the wall, they'd read equality for the few, subjugation for the many, right next to excellence or death, and work-life balance is for the weak. Spartan religion and beliefs would make modern spiritual wellness influencers spontaneously combust. While sharing many deities with other Greek city-states, Spartans had a distinctive religious approach that, surprise, centered primarily around war, discipline, and state control. Apollo was particularly venerated as a warrior god, with the festival of Carnea held in his honor each summer. During this festival, Spartans wouldn't conduct military operations, which explains why only 300 Spartans, plus some helots and allies, faced the Persians at Thermopylae while the main army celebrated. That's right, the most famous last stand in military history happened partly because the religious calendar said, sorry, can't reschedule this festival. Imagine your company refusing to address a major crisis because it conflicts with the annual holiday party. Additionally, Spartans particularly revered Artemis Orthia, whose worship involved the charming ritual of diamastagosis, flogging adolescent boys at her altar until they bled, sometimes to death. The boys were encouraged not to cry out, with those showing the most endurance receiving special honors. Just imagine modern parents proudly posting on social media, "Little Timmy got whipped unconscious at the altar today and didn't make a sound. Hashtag proud Spartan mom, hashtag no tears, hashtag raising warriors." Your religious calendar would be filled with festivals and observances, each with military undertones. The Gymnopedia honored Apollo through naked exercises and dances performed by men of all ages, demonstrating physical prowess while commemorating fallen warriors. The Hyacinthia combined mourning for the mythical youth Hyacinthus with celebration of Apollo, featuring competitions and rituals that reinforce Spartan values. Before battle, kings would perform sacrifices to determine if the gods favored combat. Favorable omens meant advance. Unfavorable signs meant retreat or tactical adjustments. This wasn't mere superstition, but a practical system that allowed military leaders to avoid unfavorable conditions while maintaining divine justification. Imagine a modern general saying, "We're not retreating because the enemy has superior numbers and position. We're retreating because the chicken entrails were unfavorable." It's much better for morale. Religious rituals permeated daily life, with libations before meals, prayers before training, and various observances marking life transitions. These weren't optional spiritual practices, but mandatory civic duties, with negligence potentially resulting in punishment. Freedom of religion wasn't a concept in Sparta, or anywhere in ancient Greece for that matter. Your spiritual practices were as standardized as your military training, with about as much room for personal interpretation. Spartan beliefs about death and the afterlife largely aligned with broader Greek concepts, though with distinctive martial emphasis. They believed in the underworld ruled by Hades, where the dead existed as shades of their former selves. However, Spartans particularly emphasized the concept of kleos, eternal glory and remembrance through heroic deeds, especially in battle. A glorious death ensured your name would live on in Spartan oral tradition, a form of immortality through remembrance. This belief system created a culture where a certain type of death was actively preferred to a long life without distinction. The famous epitaph of the Spartans who fell at Thermopylae encapsulates this value system. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Note the emphasis on obedience to laws rather than individual heroism. Even in death, the collective values superseded personal glory. Modern people might worry about their legacy through children, creative works, or professional achievements. Spartans worried exclusively about whether their death would be sufficiently memorable to be recounted to future generations. It's like being concerned not with having a Wikipedia page, but specifically with having a Wikipedia page that details your impressively gruesome but honorable death. Superstitions and omens played crucial roles in Spartan military and political decisions. Before major campaigns, kings consulted the oracle at Delphi, whose cryptic pronouncements were interpreted to guide strategy. Astronomical events, animal behavior, and unusual occurrences were carefully observed for divine messages. During the earthquake of 464 BCE, which devastated Sparta and triggered a massive Helot rebellion, the disaster was interpreted as divine punishment for violating sanctuary rites when Helots were executed after seeking refuge in a temple of Poseidon. Rather than considering geological explanations or addressing the underlying social tensions that drove Helots to rebellion, Spartans focused on religious atonement alongside military suppression. This blend of practical response and supernatural interpretation characterized Spartan problem-solving. Imagine your company experiencing a massive data breach and the CEO announcing, "We've determined this happened because we didn't properly celebrate the IT department's birthdays last month. We'll immediately sacrifice 3 printers to appease the cyber gods and also maybe update our security software." This approach might seem irrational to modern sensibilities, but it provided psychological comfort and social cohesion in the face of events beyond their technological control or understanding. The religious authority structure in Sparta was uniquely intertwined with political leadership. The 2 kings served as high priests of Zeus, conducting monthly sacrifices and leading major religious observances. This dual political religious role gave their decisions divine sanction and reinforced their authority. Religious specialists like seers and diviners accompanied armies, interpreting omens before and during battle. Their influence could be substantial. A negative interpretation might delay or cancel military operations regardless of strategic considerations. Religion provided both legitimacy for the social order and psychological tools for managing the extreme stress of Spartan life. By attributing their harsh social system to divine will and ancestral tradition, Spartan leaders sanctified practices that might otherwise be questioned. Religious rituals also created rare opportunities for emotional release in an otherwise severely restrained society. During certain festivals, rigid discipline relaxed, allowing for expressions of community, joy, and even grief that were suppressed in daily life. It's like a company that enforces draconian work conditions year-round, but has an absolutely wild holiday party where employees are briefly allowed to act like normal humans before returning to their cubicles. Spartans had a complex relationship with fate and personal agency. They believed in an immutable destiny determined by the gods, yet simultaneously emphasized individual responsibility for maintaining courage and discipline. This seeming contradiction resolved in their concept of honorable behavior. While you couldn't control the outcome of battle, determined by gods. You could control whether you face that outcome with courage or cowardice. This belief system created warriors who combined fatalistic acceptance of death with fierce determination to die properly. Before the Battle of Thermopylae, when told the Persian arrows would blot out the sun, the Spartan Dionysus famously replied, "Good, then we will fight in the shade." This response perfectly captures Spartan religious psychology, acknowledgement of overwhelming odds combined with unflinching resolve and even dark humor. The certainty of death becomes irrelevant. Only the manner of death matters. Modern therapy might call this radical acceptance, but Spartans took it to an extreme that would make even the most stoic therapist raise an eyebrow. Imagine your life coach saying, "You're definitely going to die horribly in this business venture, but the important thing is to maintain good posture while it happens." Religious education formed a central component of the agoge, with young boys learning not just the myths and rituals, but the proper Spartan interpretations emphasizing military virtues. Stories of gods and heroes were filtered to highlight courage, discipline, and sacrifice while downplaying aspects like artistic achievement or intellectual inquiry that received emphasis in other Greek interpretations. The famous tale of the Spartan boy who stole a fox exemplifies this distinctive religious education. The boy, having stolen a fox as part of his training in stealth, hid the animal under his cloak when questioned by authorities. Rather than confess, he allowed the fox to gnaw into his organs, eventually killing him, all to avoid the dishonor of being caught. This story was presented not as a tragedy, but as an exemplar of proper Spartan values, with religious overtones suggesting divine approval of such extreme dedication to principles. Modern educational approaches emphasize critical thinking and questioning. Spartan religious education emphasized unquestioning acceptance of traditional interpretations. It's like a school that teaches the moral of Little Red Riding Hood is that you should be willing to let the wolf eat you rather than admit you strayed from the path. The concept of miasma, religious pollution, and its purification played a significant role in Spartan life. Actions like murder, oath-breaking, or improper treatment of the dead could create spiritual contamination requiring ritual cleansing. Before and after battles, purification rituals ensure divine favor and cleanse participants of blood guilt. These practices provided psychological mechanisms for processing the trauma of combat, giving warriors structured ways to transition between the violent world of battle and regular society. While modern military personnel might receive psychological counseling for combat stress, Spartans performed elaborate purification rituals that served some similar functions while reinforcing religious worldviews. The effectiveness of these rituals in addressing what we would now call PTSD is debatable, but they offered social recognition of the psychological impacts of warfare and provided communal support for reintegration. It's like replacing modern therapy with an elaborate car wash for the soul. Not addressing the underlying issues, perhaps, but at least acknowledging that something needs cleaning. Religious skepticism or innovation was actively discouraged in Sparta, even more so than in other Greek states. While Athens produced philosophers who questioned traditional religious narratives, Sparta maintained extraordinary religious conservatism. The Spartans' reluctance to alter religious practices became almost comical in its rigidity. They continued using ancient wooden cult statues long after other Greeks adopted more sophisticated marble sculptures and maintained archaic ritual forms abandoned elsewhere. This religious conservatism aligned with their broader resistance to change, creating a society increasingly out of step with developments in the wider Greek world. When Sparta eventually declined as a power, their inability to adapt, justified partly through religious traditionalism, played a significant role. Think of a company still using Windows 95 and fax machines in 2025 because that's how the founders did it, then wondering why competitors are outperforming them. The ultimate irony is that Sparta's religious practices, designed to ensure their survival and supremacy, contributed to their eventual irrelevance by preventing adaptation to changing circumstances. Sparta's religious life also featured unusual practices regarding death and burial. Unlike other Greeks, who placed high value on proper funeral rites and elaborate tombs, Spartans practiced notably austere funerals with minimal ceremony, except for kings and those who died gloriously in battle. Most Spartans received simple burials with plain markers, reflecting the egalitarian principles among citizens and the emphasis on collective identity over individual memorialization. However, warriors who died courageously in battle received special honors, with their names and deeds preserved in communal memory through songs and stories. Those who displayed cowardice might be denied proper burial entirely, a devastating religious punishment that condemned their souls to restless wandering. The most famous Spartan graves were those of the 300 at Thermopylae, marked with a legendary epitaph composed by Simonides. This approach to death and remembrance reinforced the central Spartan value, that how one dies matters more than how one lives. Modern societies generally value long, productive lives. Sparta valued brief, glorious ones. It's like working at a company where your retirement party is elaborate only if you dramatically sacrifice yourself for the quarterly earnings report. Otherwise, they just quietly clean out your desk and reallocate your parking space. Perhaps the most distinctive aspect of Spartan religious practice was its practical, utilitarian approach to spiritual matters. While other Greeks certainly sought divine favor for practical outcomes, Spartans elevated this approach to state policy. Religious observances weren't primarily about personal spiritual fulfillment, but about ensuring collective security and success. Divination before battle wasn't just superstition, but a practical decision-making tool that allowed leaders to assess troop morale and fighting conditions while maintaining divine authority. Religious festivals weren't merely spiritual events, but training opportunities and social bonding exercises that reinforced military readiness. This pragmatic approach created a religious system perfectly aligned with Spartan militarism, where spirituality served the state rather than individual souls. The gods existed primarily to sanction Spartan social order and military actions, with personal religious experience subordinated to collective needs. Modern workplace wellness programs sometimes serve similar functions, ostensibly about employee well-being, but actually designed to increase productivity and reduce healthcare costs. Sparta just took this instrumentalization of spirituality to its logical extreme, creating a religious system where even the gods were effectively enlisted in military service. The role of oaths in Spartan religion deserves special attention, as oath-keeping was considered not just a social obligation, but a sacred duty with divine consequences for violation. Spartans were famous throughout Greece for their trustworthiness regarding sworn commitments, with other Greeks sometimes commenting that Spartans required fewer written contracts because their word was considered reliable. This reputation stemmed partly from genuine religious belief in divine punishment for oath-breaking and partly from practical recognition that maintaining trustworthiness was strategically valuable for a military state. Spartan religious education emphasized the dire consequences of false oaths, with stories of divine retribution for perjurers. Interestingly, this emphasis on oath-keeping existed alongside the encouragement of deception and trickery in military contexts. Spartans saw no contradiction between absolute fidelity to formal oaths and strategic deception of enemies. The god Hermes, patron of both travelers and thieves, received special veneration for his cunning, suggesting a religious sanction for certain types of deception when properly applied. It's like a corporate culture that strictly enforces signed non-disclosure agreements while encouraging employees to gather intelligence on competitors through any means not explicitly prohibited. A selective ethics justified through formalized boundaries. Modern society might call this having your moral cake and eating it too, but Spartans would simply call it practical religious observance. Every day in Sparta is a high-stakes game of survival, with a dizzying array of threats that would make modern insurance actuaries weep into their probability tables. Let's start with the obvious: warfare. As a Spartan, your primary occupation is fighting, which comes with a distinct occupational hazard of having very determined people trying to kill you with sharp bronze objects. The hoplite phalanx formation, while effective, is essentially a bronze meat grinder where you're packed so tightly that individual skill matters less than collective discipline. A break in formation means death not just for you, but potentially your entire unit. The Aspie Shield's design reinforces this reality. It protects both you and the man to your left, creating a system where fleeing endangers your comrades. This intentional design means that in battle, you're trapped between enemies trying to kill you from the front and social disgrace. Worse than death in Spartan culture, if you retreat. Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. Or more accurately, between an enemy's spear and your entire society's contempt. If you think modern performance reviews are stressful, try one where underperforming means either dying or becoming a social outcast condemned to a life worse than death. Battle injuries present their own special category of dangers, with medical knowledge limited to apply pressure, cauterize, or amputate if necessary. Even minor wounds frequently led to infection and death. Tetanus, gangrene, and sepsis killed more warriors than enemy weapons. Wounded Spartans faced not just physical suffering, but potential social demotion if injuries impaired fighting ability. The Spartan medical approach to battlefield trauma was essentially walk it off or die with dignity, with minimal pain management beyond wine. Surgical techniques were rudimentary at best, consisting primarily of wound cleaning, bandaging, and hope. Severe injuries meant either death or a life of disgrace, as you could no longer fulfill your warrior role. There was no honorable retirement for the disabled in Sparta, no recognition of sacrifice through injury, only the stark binary of functional warrior or social reject. Imagine a workplace where breaking your leg means not just physical pain, but demotion to the company pariah who's no longer invited to meetings, yet still expected to show up every day to be an example of failure. That's Spartan disability policy in a nutshell. In the absence of physical therapy, antibiotics, or even basic painkillers, injuries that would be temporary setbacks in modern times became life-altering catastrophes. Disease presents another constant threat, made worse by Spartan lifestyle choices. The communal living arrangements in barracks and Syssitia, while excellent for building unit cohesion, created perfect conditions for disease transmission. Sparta experienced periodic outbreaks of everything from dysentery to typhoid, spreading rapidly through their close-quarter living arrangements. The famous black broth and generally restricted diet left warriors undernourished and more vulnerable to illness. While Spartans emphasized cleanliness more than some ancient peoples, their understanding of disease transmission was non-existent, with illness attributed to miasma, bad air, or divine displeasure rather than pathogens. Treatment options were limited to herbal remedies, religious rituals, and that universal ancient painkiller, wine. The Spartan approach to illness was typically stoic: endure without complaint, continue duties if physically possible, and die without making a fuss if not. This combination of communal living, nutritional deficiency, and limited medical knowledge made disease a more reliable killer than enemy soldiers. Just imagine your boss saying, "Yes, half the office has this mysterious illness with a 30% fatality rate, but attendance is still mandatory." Try not to cough on the quarterly reports. Environmental hazards in Sparta added another layer of daily danger. The training regimen deliberately exposed Spartans to extreme conditions, exercising naked in winter, enduring summer heat without adequate hydration, sleeping on reed mats in unheated barracks. These practices, intended to create hardiness, instead created perfect conditions for hypothermia, heat stroke, and a host of other environmental injuries. The Eurotas River, where Spartans bathed daily regardless of weather, claimed lives through drowning and hypothermia. The deliberate underfeeding of youth during training led to developmental issues, stunted growth, and increased vulnerability to disease. Even the landscape itself presented hazards. Mount Taygetus, famous as the site where defective infants were allegedly abandoned, was prone to rock slides and winter storms that claimed unwary travelers. The Spartan belief that comfort created weakness led to a deliberate embrace of environmental hardship that significantly increased mortality risks. Modern workplace safety regulations exist for good reasons. Imagine an office that deliberately disabled the heating and air conditioning, removed all chairs, and encouraged employees to work outdoors during thunderstorms to build character. OSHA would have a field day, but in Sparta, this was just Tuesday. Social dangers in Sparta could be as deadly as physical ones. The constant evaluation by peers and superiors created an environment where perceived weakness or cowardice could result in outcomes ranging from public humiliation to execution. The pressure to maintain perfect adherence to Spartan values was relentless and psychologically crushing. The Agoj system essentially institutionalized bullying, with older boys encouraged to toughen up younger ones through physical and psychological abuse. This created a perpetual cycle of trauma where yesterday's victims became tomorrow's abusers. The infamous Cryptia, where young Spartans were sent to murder helots, served as both a training exercise and a loyalty test. Participation made you complicit in state violence, binding you more tightly to the system. Failure or refusal wasn't an option without severe consequences. This created a society where psychological safety was non-existent, with conformity enforced through fear and shared complicity in violence. Modern workplace bullying can cause serious psychological harm. Spartan institutional bullying created an entire society suffering from what we now recognize as widespread, severe PTSD. It's like working at a company where the onboarding process includes being hazed by your managers, then being required to haze the next round of new hires to prove your loyalty. Food insecurity presents another daily challenge in Spartan life. The deliberate policy of providing inadequate rations, particularly during training, created a population in perpetual hunger. The famous black broth, a charming concoction of boiled pork, blood, salt, and vinegar, provided basic calories but lacked essential nutrients, leading to various deficiency diseases. The requirement to steal additional food created a precarious nutritional situation where failure meant not just hunger, but punishment. Even successful warriors dining in the Sicilia faced limited variety and quantity, with the meals designed to satisfy basic needs rather than provide optimal nutrition. This institutionalized malnutrition had long-term health consequences, including reduced resistance to disease, impaired wound healing, and various chronic conditions. The Spartan emphasis on physical perfection created the ironic situation where their own policies undermined the physical health they supposedly valued. Imagine a modern gym that requires members to maintain peak physical condition while simultaneously restricting their caloric intake to below maintenance levels and punishing anyone caught eating protein bars. That's basically the Spartan approach to nutrition and physical development. Political dangers added another layer of precarity to Spartan life. Despite their reputation for internal stability, Spartan politics could be brutally dangerous. Kings could be deposed or fined by the ephors, who in turn served limited terms and could face retribution after leaving office. Accusations of cowardice, corruption, or impiety could destroy even the most prominent citizens. The infamous case of the general Pausanias, who led the Greeks to victory at Plataea, but later died by starvation after being walled up in a temple on charges of treason, demonstrates how quickly fortunes could change. The Spartan political system's checks and balances didn't primarily protect individual rights, but rather maintained balance between competing power centers, all of which could turn against individuals who fell from favor. This created a political environment where even perfect adherence to Spartan values didn't guarantee safety if you acquired too many enemies or became politically inconvenient. It's like working at a company where exceeding your targets doesn't protect you from being fired if the VP doesn't like your tone in meetings. The most successful Spartan generals often faced the greatest political dangers, as their popularity could be perceived as a threat to established powers. Imagine being most at risk for termination precisely when you're performing best. That's Spartan political reality. The Hella population presented both a danger to Spartans and faced extreme danger from them. Outnumbering Spartans by ratios estimated between 7 to 1 and 20 to 1, Helots posed a constant threat of rebellion that shaped nearly every aspect of Spartan society. Major Helot uprisings occurred periodically, most notably following the earthquake of 464 BC, when much of Sparta was destroyed and Helots seized the opportunity to rebel. These rebellions were suppressed with extreme brutality, but the constant fear of Helot uprising required perpetual vigilance and institutionalized terrorism through practices like the Cryptia. From the Helot perspective, daily life involved the constant threat of arbitrary violence from Spartans, from ritual humiliation to summary execution. Helots could be killed without legal consequences, were subjected to regular whippings regardless of behavior, and lived under conditions of such extreme oppression that Spartan control could only be maintained through terror. This mutually dangerous relationship created a society in perpetual tension, where Spartans could never truly relax their guard and Helots could never feel secure. Imagine a workplace where executives are constantly armed because they're outnumbered 10 to 1 by workers they routinely abuse, and where workers are looking for any opportunity to overthrow management. That's the charming social dynamic of Sparta every single day. Natural disasters posed yet another threat, made worse by Spartan religious interpretations and social responses. The devastating earthquake of 464 BCE destroyed much of Sparta and killed thousands. But the religious interpretation of divine displeasure and the subsequent Helot rebellion created a compound disaster with long-lasting consequences. Without modern building codes, seismological monitoring, or effective emergency response, natural disasters struck with little warning and catastrophic impact. Drought periodically threatened food supplies, particularly affecting the Helots who produced Sparta's food and consequently creating greater risk of rebellion during times of scarcity. Floods along the Eurotas River could destroy crops and disrupt water supplies. The Spartan religious response to these events focused on identifying divine displeasure and appropriate propitiation rather than practical mitigation strategies, often exacerbating the practical impact of disasters through delayed or misdirected responses. It's like having a workplace emergency plan that consists entirely of determining which department angered the company founder, then making that department apologize publicly instead of actually putting out the fire in the break room. Psychological dangers in Sparta were perhaps the most pervasive and least acknowledged threats. The combination of constant evaluation, physical hardship, emotional suppression, and participation in state violence created conditions for severe psychological trauma. Modern understanding of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, suggests that the typical Spartan upbringing would produce extraordinarily high ACE scores, predicting significant long-term physical and mental health consequences. The cultural requirement to suppress pain, fear, and grief denied natural emotional processing, likely resulting in what we now recognize as complex PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, and various stress-related physical conditions. The social prohibition against expressing these psychological struggles meant they remained untreated and often unacknowledged, creating a society of traumatized individuals collectively pretending to be fine while enforcing the very system traumatizing them. This psychological burden was magnified by combat experiences, creating warriors who were simultaneously dealing with childhood trauma, ongoing social stress, and battlefield trauma without any effective means of processing these experiences. Imagine a workplace that deliberately creates psychological distress in employees, prohibits discussing or addressing this distress, and considers any signs of emotional struggle as ground for termination. That's the Spartan approach to mental health in a nutshell. The ultimate everyday danger in Sparta was the system itself, a society so rigidly focused on creating perfect warriors that it systematically destroyed the humanity of those warriors in the process. The total subordination of individual needs, desires, and development to the requirements of a state created a population trained to value death over dishonor, physical prowess over emotional health, and collective conformity over personal fulfillment. This system produced extraordinary short-term results in creating formidable fighters, but undermined its own sustainability through population decline, psychological damage, and inability to adapt to changing circumstances. The famous Spartan general Lycurgus supposedly created a constitution that remained unchanged for centuries, which Spartans viewed as a strength but ultimately proved to be a fatal weakness. As warfare evolved and other Greek states developed more flexible, innovative approaches, Sparta's rigid adherence to traditional methods led to eventual military decline. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where Theban forces defeated the previously invincible Spartan army, marked the beginning of the end for Spartan military supremacy. The system that created history's most formidable infantry also created the conditions for its own destruction through inflexibility, population decline, and psychological unsustainability. It's like a company that achieves extraordinary short-term results through brutal management practices that simultaneously drive away talent, prevent innovation, and create a toxic reputation that eventually makes recruiting impossible. Sparta's greatest danger was always Sparta itself, a perfect military machine programmed for its own obsolescence. In Sparta, moments of glory are as brutal as they are rare, like finding a five-star meal in a prison cafeteria. Your first real opportunity for distinction comes during the Agoj training, where exceptional performance might earn you selection for the Hippias, the elite 300-member Royal Guard, whose name confusingly means horseman despite being infantry. Making this cut is like being named Employee of the Month if the selection process involved near-death experiences and the prize was even more dangerous assignments. Congratulations on your promotion to a position with a higher mortality rate. The selection process involved a series of increasingly brutal contests where boys demonstrate not just physical prowess, but unflinching loyalty to Spartan values. Those who excel earn the right to wear longer hair, more distinctive cloaks, and the eternal envy of peers who didn't make the cut. Just imagine modern job interviews where candidates fight each other with minimal rules. The losers face lifelong humiliation, and the winners get harder work. That's Spartan career advancement in a nutshell. If you think modern workplace competition is cutthroat, try competing in a system where cutthroat isn't a metaphor, but a legitimate tactical option. For the average Spartan, battlefield glory represents the primary path to distinction. The ideal is achieving aristia, a moment of exceptional valor in combat that earns lasting fame. The Spartan who plants his feet, stands his ground when others retreat, and dies facing overwhelming odds becomes immortalized in songs and stories. Of course, the catch in this glorious career opportunity is the dies part. Spartans primarily celebrated posthumous glory, which has the obvious downside of not being around to enjoy it. The most famous Spartan warriors are almost all known for how impressively they died, rather than for long, successful lives. Leonidas at Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans who fell with him, and countless others achieved immortality specifically by not surviving. It's like working at a company where the Employee Hall of Fame exclusively features people who literally work themselves to death at their desks. Here's Tom from accounting. He completed the quarterly reports and died of exhaustion without missing a deadline. Be like Tom. This glorification of beautiful death created a society where survival could actually damage your reputation if achieved through anything that might be perceived as caution or self-preservation. The battlefield provided opportunities for both individual and collective glory. Individual acts of courage might involve being the first to engage the enemy, protestates, holding position when others fell back, rescuing a fallen comrade under fire, or killing a significant enemy commander. Collective glory came through maintaining perfect formation, executing complex maneuvers under pressure, or achieving victory against superior numbers. The Battle of Thermopylae, while technically a defeat, became Sparta's defining moment of glory precisely because it embodied their core values: discipline, sacrifice, and unflinching courage against impossible odds. The irony isn't lost on historians that Sparta's most celebrated military achievement was actually a loss. It's like a company celebrating its most spectacular bankruptcy as its proudest moment. We lost everything, but we did it with perfect SBREDSHETS. The emphasis on how one fought rather than whether one won reflects Sparta's prioritization of process over outcome, at least when the process demonstrated core values. Of course, this glosses over the inconvenient fact that the actual purpose of warfare is to win, not to die impressively while losing. Athletic competitions provided another avenue for glory, though with significant differences from other Greek approaches. While Olympic victors from Athens or other city-states became celebrities with tangible rewards, including cash prizes, tax exemptions, and free meals for life, Spartan victors received primarily increased honor rather than material benefits. Spartans regularly competed in and won Olympic events, particularly those requiring strength, endurance, and combat skills, but were forbidden from training specifically for these competitions, as their standard military training was considered sufficient preparation. This prohibition stemmed from the belief that specialization indicated decadence and distracted from military readiness. Despite these limitations, Spartans dominated certain Olympic events for generations, adding to their fearsome reputation. The most famous Spartan Olympian was Cyniska, a princess who became the first woman to win an Olympic victory in chariot racing, which allowed absent owners of the horses and chariots to be declared victors. Her achievement was celebrated, though with the typical Spartan restraint. Imagine winning a gold medal at the Olympics and your company's response being, "We expect nothing less. Return to your regular duties immediately." That's essentially the Spartan approach to athletic achievement. Political advancement offered limited opportunities for glory compared to military distinction, but exceptional statesmen could achieve lasting fame. Serving as an ephor, one of 5 annually elected officials, or joining the Gerousia, Council of Elders, brought significant honor, though these positions were typically available only to those who had already distinguished themselves militarily. Political glory in Sparta didn't come through grand speeches, brevity being a core value, or ambitious policy initiatives, tradition being paramount, but through demonstrating perfect embodiment of Spartan values while exercising authority. The statesman Brasidas achieved rare political and military glory through his skillful diplomacy and battlefield success during the Peloponnesian War, offering one of the few examples of a Spartan celebrated for his mind as much as his fighting prowess. However, true to Spartan form, his most celebrated moment came with his death in battle at Amphipolis in 422 BC, winning a victory that cost him his life. It's like being remembered in your company not for your innovative strategies or team leadership, but primarily for that time you worked through pneumonia to finish a project and died at your desk right after hitting send on the final email. Posthumous promotion achievement unlocked. For Spartan women, paths to glory differed significantly from men's, but still centered around embodying core Spartan values. Women couldn't achieve battlefield fame directly, but gained honor through producing strong sons who became distinguished warriors. The famous saying attributed to a Spartan mother handing her son his shield, "Return with it or on it," encapsulates how women's glory often came through their sons' military performance. However, Spartan women had more direct paths to distinction than women in other Greek cities, particularly through athletic prowess. Girls participated in public athletic competitions demonstrating strength, speed, and endurance, with victors receiving public recognition. Women's religious roles, particularly as priestesses, offered another avenue for public honor. The most dramatic form of female glory came through dying in childbirth, which was considered comparable to a man's death in battle, a sacrifice for Sparta's future. Imagine a workplace where women's performance reviews focused primarily on whether they'd produced children who were good employees, with a special posthumous promotion for those who died during maternity leave. The limited options for female glory reflected Sparta's gender system, more egalitarian than other Greek societies in some ways, but still fundamentally organized around military service that remained male-only. Epic failure in Sparta carried consequences far beyond the disappointment of modern professional setbacks. The most dramatic form of failure was displaying cowardice in battle, particularly by breaking ranks and fleeing. Warriors who survived battle through retreat became tremblers, Trezzanis, social pariahs subjected to a comprehensive regime of humiliation and exclusion. Tremblers were required to shave half their beards and wear distinctive patched cloaks identifying their disgrace. They could be struck with impunity by any citizen, excluded from athletic competitions and religious ceremonies, denied the right to marry, and forced to sit in designated areas during public gatherings. No one would share fire with them, speak to them first, or willingly associate with them. This social death was considered worse than physical death, creating a system where survival through perceived cowardice became a fate to be avoided at all costs. Imagine returning to your office after missing an important deadline only to find your desk moved to the bathroom, your company email disabled, your name removed from the website, and colleagues instructed to pretend you don't exist forever. That's the Spartan approach to failure, except with added physical abuse and no possibility of redemption. Failure in the Agoj training system carried equally severe consequences. Boys who failed to demonstrate sufficient toughness, skill, or adherence to Spartan values faced relentless bullying, exclusion from desirable groups, and potential denial of citizenship upon completion. Since Spartan citizenship required successful completion of the Agoj, failure during training relegated one to an inferior social class. Perioikoi, free non-citizens, at best, or potentially even helots in extreme cases. This created a training system with binary outcomes: succeed completely or fail catastrophically, with minimal middle ground. The psychological pressure was enormous, particularly since failure reflected not just on the individual, but on their entire family, potentially for generations. Imagine a school system where failing a single test means not just academic consequences, but permanent relegation to second-class citizenship, with your family's reputation destroyed for good measure. The absence of proportional consequences or opportunities for redemption created a society where perfection was the only acceptable standard, with devastating results for those who fell short for any reason, including circumstances beyond their control like illness or injury. Spartan men who failed to marry and produce children faced legal penalties and social stigma. Bachelor laws imposed various humiliations on unmarried men, particularly as they aged, including exclusion from certain religious festivals and public mockery during ceremonies. These men were required to march around the agora in winter, naked, singing songs about the justice of their punishment for failing in their duty to provide future warriors. Imagine your company implementing a policy where employees without children had to run naked through the office annually, while colleagues threw paper clips at them and chanted about their reproductive failures. That's essentially the Spartan approach to encouraging family formation. The emphasis on reproduction as civic duty rather than personal choice created another binary, where success meant meeting state requirements for legitimate offspring, while failure meant public humiliation regardless of individual circumstances or preferences. Failure to maintain physical fitness or military readiness at any age brought similar consequences. Spartans underwent regular physical examinations throughout life, with those developing obesity or other conditions perceived as results of indiscipline facing public censure. One famous story describes the Spartan king Agesilaus finding a corpulent citizen, declaring his condition a violation of Spartan laws on physical fitness. The requirement to maintain peak condition throughout adulthood created a society where natural aging processes were treated as moral failures rather than biological realities. Imagine your company implementing mandatory monthly fitness assessments, where failing to maintain the same physical capabilities you had at 25 results in demotion, regardless of your actual job duties or the natural effects of aging. This approach created significant pressure that paradoxically may have undermined long-term health through chronic stress and excessive physical demands that prevented proper recovery and adaptation. Political failure in Sparta could be catastrophic, with consequences ranging from fines and exile to execution. Kings could be deposed or fined by ephors. Generals who lost battles could face trial, and officials who proposed unsuccessful policies risked severe penalties. The Spartan constitutional system, while providing some checks and balances between different power centers, offered minimal protection for individuals who fell from favor. Political disgrace typically extended beyond the individual to affect their entire family, creating a system where the consequences of failure vastly outweighed the rewards of success. Imagine a workplace where unsuccessful project managers don't just miss out on bonuses but face criminal charges and their entire team gets fired along with them. This extreme approach to accountability certainly discouraged risk-taking and innovation, contributing to Sparta's notorious conservatism and resistance to change. When failure carries catastrophic personal consequences, maintaining the status quo becomes the safest strategy regardless of its long-term viability. The most comprehensive form of failure in Sparta was loss of citizenship status. Full citizens, homoioi, or equals, could be demoted to inferior status for various forms of failure. Inability to contribute to the syssitia, communal mess, cowardice in battle, or proposal of policies deemed harmful to Sparta. This demotion was called atimia, loss of honor, and resulted in comprehensive exclusion from the rights and privileges of citizenship. Since Spartan identity was built entirely around citizenship and warrior status, this loss constituted a form of social death from which recovery was nearly impossible. The fallen citizen became a living cautionary tale, serving as a visible reminder of the consequences of failure. Imagine your company not just firing you for poor performance, but publicly revoking your professional credentials, blacklisting you throughout the industry, and requiring you to stand outside the office wearing a sign listing your failures so current employees can see the consequences of inadequacy. The all-or-nothing nature of Spartan citizenship created extraordinary pressure to maintain perfect adherence to expectations, regardless of personal cost. The Spartan approach to glory and failure reveals much about their core values and psychological framework. Glory came primarily through perfect embodiment of collective ideals rather than individual achievement or innovation. The highest honor typically involved sacrificing individual survival for collective benefit, creating a society that literally valued death over life when the death served state interests. Failure carried disproportionate, often permanent consequences with minimal opportunity for redemption or second chances. This binary system of extreme outcomes, glorious death or a shameful life, created psychological conditions where fear of failure likely motivated behavior more powerfully than aspiration for success. Modern performance psychology emphasizes the greater effectiveness of positive motivation over fear-based compliance, suggesting that Sparta's approach, while creating short-term conformity, likely undermined long-term flourishing and adaptation. The ultimate failure of Sparta itself, declining from supreme military power to marginal state within a century, reflects the limitations of a system that prioritizes rigid adherence to tradition over innovation and adaptation. Sparta achieved immortal fame not through lasting success, but through spectacular, noble failure, particularly at Thermopylae. In the final accounting, Sparta's approach to glory and failure created a society that valued dying well over living well, a value system that ultimately proved unsustainable. The glory of a beautiful death makes for compelling stories, but poor long-term social planning. If Sparta were a modern company, it would be famous for its spectacular bankruptcy and uncompromising corporate culture rather than for its sustainable business model or employee satisfaction ratings. If you've managed to survive the brutal agouge, constant warfare, social scrutiny, deliberate malnutrition, and institutionalized violence that characterizes Spartan life, congratulations. You've reached the age where most societies would offer retirement, leisure, and respect for your accumulated wisdom. In Sparta, however, old age brings a whole new set of challenges that make the previous decades look like a holiday at the Mediterranean beach resort. Formal military service continues until age 60, meaning Spartan men spend 40 years in active duty, a retirement age that would make modern workers riot in the streets. Even after retirement, Spartan elders remain subject to the same expectations of physical fitness, discipline, and perfect adherence to Spartan values. The only significant career change at 60 is potential eligibility for the Jerusalem Council of Elders, a political body of 28 members plus the two kings. This sounds like a cushy retirement position until you realize selection is through public acclamation. Literally, candidates parade before the assembly, and those receiving the loudest cheers win. Imagine a retirement system where senior executives compete for a limited number of board positions based on which one gets the most enthusiastic applause. It's like American Idol for the geriatric set, except instead of singing, you're judged on how well you've internalized state propaganda over 6 decades. The physical realities of aging in a society that equates physical prowess with moral worth creates predictable challenges. Despite Sparta's emphasis on physical fitness, the human body has limitations that even the most rigorous training and iron discipline cannot overcome. Declining strength, reduced visual acuity, slower reflexes, and increased vulnerability to injury and illness are biological realities of aging, not character flaws. Yet Sparta's value system made little accommodation for these natural processes, creating a society where the inevitable effects of aging became sources of shame rather than accepted transitions. Warriors who had survived decades of combat, training, and deliberate hardship faced the final indignity of being unable to meet the same physical standards that define their worth throughout life. Imagine working at a company that requires the same physical output from 65-year-old employees as from 25-year-olds, with demotion and public humiliation for those whose performance declines with age. The psychological burden of this system must have been crushing, particularly for men who had sacrificed everything to embody Spartan ideals throughout life, only to find those ideals literally unattainable in their final years. The demographic realities of ancient Sparta meant relatively few citizens reached old age at all. Between battlefield casualties, training accidents, disease, and the cumulative effects of nutritional deficiencies and physical stress, many Spartans died long before reaching their 60s. Historical estimates suggest male life expectancy for Spartan citizens who survived childhood may have been between 45 to 55 years, significantly lower than for wealthy men in Athens or other Greek cities with less physically demanding lifestyles. Those who did reach advanced age often carried the cumulative effects of multiple injuries, leading to chronic pain and disability. Without effective pain management beyond wine and herbal remedies, these conditions created a daily reality of suffering masked by the cultural requirement to show no weakness. Imagine reaching retirement age with the accumulated injuries of an NFL linebacker after a 40-year career, but without modern orthopedic surgery, physical therapy, or even basic analgesics. Now add the expectation that you should never complain, show pain, or allow these conditions to affect your performance of civic duties. That's the charming reality of Spartan retirement planning. Social status in old age depended heavily on how well one had fulfilled Spartan expectations throughout life. Those who had distinguished themselves in battle, raised successful warrior sons, and maintained impeccable adherence to Spartan values could enjoy genuine respect and influence. The Jerusalem members wielded significant political power, serving lifetime terms with authority to overturn assembly decisions they deemed harmful to Sparta. However, those who had experienced any significant failure, cowardice in battle, loss of citizenship status, failure to produce male heirs, faced continued exclusion and humiliation into old age. Unlike other societies where elders might be valued for experience regardless of past mistakes, Sparta maintained its unforgiving approach throughout the lifespan. Imagine a retirement community where residents are segregated based on their career performance evaluations, with those who received any negative feedback forced to sit at separate tables in the dining hall and wear distinctive clothing identifying their past failures. The binary nature of Spartan social worth, either exemplary or disgraceful with minimal middle ground, extended into old age, creating a system where past mistakes could never be forgiven or overcome regardless of subsequent contribution or changed circumstances. Care for the elderly in Sparta reflected their utilitarian approach to human value. Those who maintained physical capability and continued contributing to society through political service, military training of youth, or religious functions received necessary support. However, those with significant disability or inability to contribute faced neglect at best and active marginalization at worst. Unlike Athens, where family members had legal obligations to care for elderly parents, Spartan elders depended primarily on the state support system that treated them according to their perceived ongoing value. This created particular challenges for those without surviving children or whose children had died in battle or fallen from social grace. The ultimate irony of the Spartan system was that by prioritizing military service and encouraging glorious death in battle, it created a society with declining population and insufficient support systems for its aging members. Imagine a company pension plan that pays benefits based not on years of service, but on current productivity, with those unable to maintain output seeing their retirement income progressively reduced regardless of past contribution. The system essentially told Spartans, your value is your current utility, not your cumulative contribution, creating an understandable fear of aging and disability that compounded the already significant stresses of Spartan life. The treatment of disabled Spartans deserves special attention, as it reveals much about their utilitarian approach to human worth. Whether disability resulted from birth conditions, battlefield injuries, illness, or age-related decline, the response was similarly harsh. Those with congenital conditions rarely survived infancy due to the examination system that condemned defective babies to exposure. Those disabled through injury or illness faced social demotion proportional to how the disability affected military capability. Complete disability that prevented military service typically resulted in loss of citizenship status and associated rights, regardless of how the disability was acquired. This created the perverse situation where warriors injured defending Sparta could find themselves relegated to non-citizen status as a result, with minimal accommodation or support. Imagine a workplace where employees injured performing essential job functions not only receive no workers' compensation, but are demoted and publicly humiliated for their resulting limitations. The absence of concepts like honorable discharge, disability accommodation, or recognition of sacrifice through injury created a system where fear of disability likely exceeded fear of death for many Spartans. The psychological impact of aging in such a system must have been profound. After decades of extraordinary self-discipline, constant evaluation, and unrelenting physical demands, Spartan elders faced the ultimate challenge: maintaining perfect adherence to standards that became biologically impossible with advancing age. The cognitive dissonance between lifetime indoctrination in Spartan values and the reality of physical decline must have created significant psychological distress with no culturally acceptable outlet. The requirement to maintain emotional control and never show weakness remained in effect regardless of physical or psychological challenges, creating conditions for what modern clinicians would recognize as complex trauma responses, depression, anxiety, and various stress-related conditions. Imagine spending your entire life in a system that defines worth through physical capability, then watching those capabilities inevitably decline while being expected to maintain the same stoic facade that's defined your existence. The psychological burden of this contradiction helps explain the famous Spartan emphasis on choosing glorious death over extended life, a cultural preference that makes perfect sense in a system where aging brought progressive loss of the very qualities that define social worth. Religious and philosophical approaches to aging and death in Sparta reflected their broader values. Unlike philosophical traditions that emerged in Athens and other Greek cities exploring the meaning of life and potential afterlife, Spartan thought remained focused on pragmatic concerns of state security and military effectiveness. The concept of beautiful death in battle during one's prime years was elevated above all other end-of-life scenarios. Those who achieved this ideal gained immortality through remembrance in Spartan oral tradition, with their names and deeds preserved for future generations. Those who died of old age or illness received basic funeral rites, but minimal commemoration regardless of lifetime achievement. This created a value system where the manner of death took precedence over the quality of life or cumulative contribution. Imagine a company where employees who die at their desks during particularly stressful projects receive elaborate memorial services and company-wide recognition, while those who complete full careers and retire normally get a standard issue plaque and polite farewell email. The glorification of premature death in service to the state creates obvious population sustainability issues in the long term, contributing to Sparta's eventual decline through simple mathematics. Societies that consistently lose their most capable members in their reproductive prime years face obvious demographic challenges regardless of military success. The treatment of elderly women in Sparta deserves separate consideration, as their experience differed significantly from men's while maintaining distinctive Spartan characteristics. Spartan women maintained relatively high status into old age compared to women in other Greek societies, particularly if they had produced successful warrior sons. Postmenopausal women often enjoyed greater freedom of movement and speech, with elderly women known for their sharp tongues and willingness to publicly criticize men who failed to meet Spartan standards. Plutarch records that the verbal barbs of Spartan old women were feared more than official censure, suggesting significant informal social power. However, this status remained contingent on having fulfilled their primary function of producing warriors, with childless women or those whose sons had displayed cowardice facing significant social penalties regardless of age. The emphasis on reproductive success as the primary measure of female worth created a system where women's value remained instrumentalized even as the specific expectations changed with age. Imagine a workplace where female executives are evaluated primarily on how many successful managers they've mentored rather than their direct contributions, with those who focus solely on personal achievement relegated to lesser status regardless of results. The conditional nature of respect for elderly women mirrors the broader Spartan approach of valuing individuals primarily for their contribution to state interests rather than intrinsic worth. The declining years of Sparta itself as a power offers instructive parallels to individual aging in Spartan society. After defeat by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, Sparta's military supremacy ended, beginning a period of progressive decline. Much like individual Spartans facing the inevitable effects of aging, Sparta as a state proved unable to adapt to changing circumstances or modify the values and practices that had previously brought success. The rigid adherence to tradition that characterized Spartan culture prevented innovation in military tactics, diplomatic approaches, or social organization that might have allowed recovery from defeat. Population decline, partly resulting from the very values that had created Spartan military excellence, accelerated this process. By the time of Roman conquest, in the 2nd century BCE, Sparta had become largely a tourist attraction, trading on past glory rather than a significant power, maintaining the outward forms of their traditional system while lacking the substance that had made it effective. Imagine a once dominant company refusing to adapt to technological change or evolving market conditions, gradually declining into irrelevance, while still maintaining the corporate culture and practices that had brought success generations earlier. Sparta's collective aging process mirrors the individual experience it created, a system that achieved extraordinary results in its prime, but proved fundamentally unsustainable and unable to adapt to inevitable change. The most profound irony of the Spartan approach to aging lies in its contribution to their eventual decline as a power. The combination of high battlefield casualties, relatively late marriage age for men, and cultural glorification of death over survival created progressive population decline among full citizens. Aristotle noted this problem in his Politics, observing that Sparta had once fielded armies of 10,000 citizens, but in his time struggled to produce 1,000. The famous Spartan king Agesilaus, when asked why Sparta had no defensive walls, responded that the men are the walls of Sparta. But this philosophy created the situation where eventually there weren't enough men to form those metaphorical walls. The system literally consumed itself, sacrificing long-term sustainability for short-term military effectiveness. Modern organizational psychology recognizes that systems focused exclusively on maximizing current performance while neglecting sustainability typically experience this pattern. Initial spectacular results followed by collapse as the human resources sustaining the system are depleted faster than they can be replenished. Sparta essentially created an unsustainable pension crisis through its own cultural values, reaching a point where there weren't enough young warriors to defend the state or support its aging population. The Spartan approach to aging reveals the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their entire system. A society ostensibly designed for survival and military success that systematically undermined its own long-term viability. By creating a culture that valued beautiful death over extended life, immediate military effectiveness over population sustainability, and rigid tradition over adaptation, Sparta engineered its own eventual decline. The treatment of aging warriors who had given everything to embody Spartan ideals only to find themselves devalued, as those capabilities naturally diminished, mirrors the trajectory of the state itself. Extraordinary achievement in its prime followed by inability to adapt to changing conditions. If you managed to survive to old age as a Spartan, congratulations on beating the odds, but don't expect a gold watch, retirement party, or even basic dignity as your reward. Your society has squeezed every possible drop of utility from you for 6 decades, and now views your inevitable decline as a moral failure rather than a biological reality. If this sounds depressing, well, that's because it absolutely is. But at least you've outlived most of your comrades who achieved that beautiful death Spartan poets praise so highly. Cold comfort, perhaps, but in Sparta, comfort of any temperature was never part of the deal. Sparta's modern legacy is a masterclass in successful historical branding despite questionable product quality. Few ancient societies have achieved such enduring popular recognition while being so fundamentally misunderstood. The Sparta of modern imagination bears about as much resemblance to historical reality as a chicken nugget does to an actual chicken. Vaguely similar shape, entirely different substance, and processed to appeal to modern tastes. Contemporary culture celebrates Spartan badassery through fitness challenges, sports team names, and military unit mottos, while conveniently ignoring the infanticide, institutionalized child abuse, systematic rape, and slave terrorism that were integral to the actual Spartan system. It's like admiring someone's impressive muscles while politely overlooking that they achieved them through a combination of performance-enhancing drugs, criminal intimidation of competitors, and sacrificing puppies to the fitness gods. The 2006 film 300 represents the perfect distillation of this selective memory. Visually stunning, emotionally stirring, historically laughable, and about as nuanced as a sledgehammer to the face. If the ancient Spartans could see how they're portrayed in modern culture, they'd probably be pleased by the continued admiration, but confused by which aspects of their society we choose to celebrate versus those we strategically forget. The myths surrounding Sparta begin with the famous tale of newborn inspection and disposal of defective infants. While historical evidence suggests some form of this practice existed, modern portrayals often present it as a binary judgment. Perfect specimens kept, all others discarded. Archaeological evidence complicates this narrative, with infant remains at the supposed disposal site, the apotheti near Mount Taygetus being notably absent. Some historians now suggest the practice may have been more symbolic or applied only in extreme cases rather than the universal eugenics program depicted in popular accounts. Similarly, the famous Agoj system is often portrayed as a straightforward military training program, ignoring its complex role as a mechanism of social control, psychological conditioning, and reinforcement of class boundaries. Modern admirers who fantasize about Spartan education teaching real toughness might reconsider if they understood it was designed primarily to create psychological trauma bonds, ensuring unwavering loyalty to the state. Imagine a modern parent enthusiastically sending their child to Spartan Leadership Academy, only to discover it involves ritual flogging, systematic starvation, and encouraging older students to physically and psychologically abuse younger ones. The brochure somehow forgot to mention those character-building activities. The historical irony of Sparta's legacy lies in what we choose to remember versus what actually made their system function. We celebrate their military prowess while ignoring that it was built upon one of history's most extreme slave states. We admire their physical fitness while overlooking the deliberate malnutrition that was part of their training. We praise their equality among citizens while conveniently forgetting this equality extended to perhaps 10% of the total population at most. We laud their women's relative freedom compared to other Greek states, while skipping over the fact that this freedom existed primarily to produce better warriors, not from any proto-feminist principles. It's like praising a serial killer for their excellent organizational skills and attention to detail, while downplaying the actual murders. Technically accurate, but missing some rather important context. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Sparta's most celebrated moment, Thermopylae, was a defeat, not a victory, and one that ultimately proved strategically unnecessary as the naval battle of Salamis proved more decisive in repelling the Persian invasion. We've immortalized a tactical failure while forgetting the strategic success that actually saved Greece, largely because the former makes a better story despite being less historically significant. If a Spartan warrior suddenly materialized in modern society, their adjustment period would make for a darkly comedic reality show. Imagine their bewilderment at our physical softness combined with unprecedented longevity. We're simultaneously weaker and longer-lived than any humans they could comprehend. Our obesity epidemic would strike them as evidence of moral collapse, while our medical technology would seem like divine intervention. They'd be horrified by our educational system's focus on critical thinking over memorization and obedience, yet impressed by the specialized knowledge it produces. Modern warfare would leave them conflicted, appreciative of the discipline and technology, but disturbed by the physical distance between combatants and the limited role of direct physical courage. Our treatment of children would seem criminally indulgent, our approach to physical fitness simultaneously obsessive yet ineffective, and our individualistic values fundamentally incomprehensible. The concept of working primarily at a desk would strike them as suitable only for disabled warriors or women, while our entertainment would seem decadently time-consuming yet strangely bloodless. Imagine trying to explain to a Spartan warrior that millions of people spend hours pretending to be warriors in video games rather than actually training with weapons. Their laconic response would likely be printable only with heavy censorship. The modern Spartan aesthetic has become a billion-dollar industry, catering to those seeking to associate themselves with ancient warrior virtues without the inconvenient brutality or actual hardship. Obstacle course races like the Spartan race offer weekend warriors the opportunity to temporarily imagine themselves as ancient warriors while enjoying post-race protein shakes and massage therapy unavailable to actual Spartans. Military and law enforcement units adopt Spartan mottos and imagery, selecting the inspiring aspects of their legacy while discarding the problematic elements. Fitness programs promise Spartan results through workouts that, while challenging, pale in comparison to the systematic physical destruction the actual agoge inflicted on young bodies. It's like claiming to follow the Viking diet while shopping at Whole Foods, a comfortable modern approximation stripped of the actual hardship, violence, and cultural context that define the original. The commodification of Spartan as shorthand for extreme toughness represents one of history's most successful posthumous rebranding campaigns, transforming a slave state built on institutionalized child abuse into an aspirational fitness lifestyle embraced by corporate executives and suburban fitness enthusiasts alike. The actual historical legacy of Sparta is considerably more complex and less flattering than the popular mythology suggests. Their military innovations, while impressive in their time, proved inflexible and ultimately led to defeat once opponents adapted their tactics. Their social system, designed to create perfect warriors, produced short-term military excellence at the cost of long-term demographic decline and cultural stagnation. Their rejection of commerce, art, philosophy, and other pursuits that flourished in Athens left remarkably little lasting cultural legacy beyond their military reputation. While Athens gave the world democracy, philosophy, drama, and architectural marvels that continue to influence modern society, Sparta's primary contribution was a cautionary tale about the limitations of extreme militarism and the unsustainability of societies built exclusively around warfare. It's telling that we still read Athenian philosophers, perform Athenian plays, and imitate Athenian architecture, while Spartan culture is primarily remembered through accounts written by non-Spartans. The society that focused exclusively on developing warriors rather than writers essentially lost control of their own historical narrative, an irony that would not be lost on the Athenians, who ultimately proved more influential despite losing the Peloponnesian War. If we're honest about what implementing Spartan values in modern society would actually entail, the absurdity becomes readily apparent. A truly Spartan education system would involve removing children from their parents at age 7, subjecting them to physical hardship and abuse under state supervision, and evaluating them exclusively on physical prowess and unquestioning obedience rather than critical thinking or creative skills. A Spartan healthcare system would provide excellent preventive care and physical training while denying treatment to anyone deemed insufficiently valuable to the state, essentially death panels, but without the political hyperbole. A Spartan economic system would prohibit the professional class from engaging in commerce or specialized labor, creating an apartheid state where an elite warrior class controlled all political power while enslaved populations performed all productive work. A Spartan approach to disability would involve active elimination of those born with congenital conditions and social death for those who acquired disabilities later in life, regardless of how these disabilities were acquired. Imagine the campaign slogans: "Vote Spartan," "Making Infanticide Great Again," or the Spartan Healthcare Plan, "Die gloriously before requiring Medicare." The aspects of Spartan society we selectively admire become considerably less appealing when we acknowledge the full system that produced them. The enduring fascination with Sparta reveals more about our own cultural anxieties than about historical reality. In periods of perceived cultural decadence or moral decline, Sparta emerges as a fantasy of discipline, clarity, and purpose, a society that supposedly avoided the complexities and compromises of modern life through sheer force of will and adherence to traditional values. This projection says more about our discomfort with modernity than about ancient Sparta itself. The historical record reveals a society that achieved military excellence through extraordinary social control and systematic brutality, ultimately failing to adapt to changing conditions and declining into irrelevance. Their approach to education produced excellent soldiers, but minimal innovation. Their approach to economics created military specialization, but long-term instability. Their approach to social organization maintained rigid discipline, but led to demographic collapse. It's worth noting that no modern admirer of Sparta actually advocates returning to their full system. The admiration is always selective, focusing on results while ignoring methods, celebrating discipline while overlooking brutality. It's like praising the pyramid's impressive engineering while strategically forgetting the slave labor that built them. Technically possible, but requiring significant historical amnesia. The modern workplace offers particularly rich ground for examining the absurdity of applying Spartan values in contemporary contexts. Imagine a company that implemented truly Spartan management principles. New employees would be subjected to physical trials and inadequate resources, with those who complained or failed being publicly humiliated. Managers would regularly force team members to fight each other to identify the strongest, with the losers receiving no medical care and permanent demotion. Bathroom breaks would be prohibited as evidence of weakness. Lunch would consist of nutritionally inadequate gruel intentionally designed to leave employees hungry, and anyone developing repetitive stress injuries would be fired for displaying insufficient physical resilience. The CEO would periodically declare war on the maintenance staff, authorizing executives to hunt and kill janitors found working after hours as part of leadership development. Employees would be evaluated not on productivity or innovation, but on their willingness to die for quarterly profit targets. The annual holiday party would feature employees' children being whipped to the altar of the company logo, while parents cheer those who don't cry out. Strangely, this management approach has not been featured in Harvard Business Review, despite the enduring popularity of Spartan imagery in corporate motivation seminars. The final historical irony of Sparta lies in how thoroughly they lost the most important battle, the battle for historical memory and cultural influence. Despite defeating Athens in the Peloponnesian War, Sparta ultimately lost the war for legacy. Athens, the city of philosophers, dramatists, historians, and artists, created cultural achievements that continue to shape Western civilization. Sparta, the city of warriors who considered writing beyond basic literacy an unnecessary luxury, left their story to be told primarily by others, including their defeated Athenian rivals. The society that focused exclusively on creating perfect warriors failed to create a single significant historian to document their achievements from their own perspective. It's like winning a boxing match, but letting your opponent write the only account of the fight that future generations will read. The ultimate lesson of Sparta may be that societies which define themselves exclusively through military excellence while neglecting arts, philosophy, commerce, and innovation may achieve impressive short-term results, but ultimately fade into irrelevance, remembered primarily through the writings of those who valued the very things they rejected. A truly Spartan approach to historical legacy would have involved creating their own chroniclers rather than relying on the accounts of others. But that would have required valuing something beyond military prowess, the very diversity of values they systematically eliminated from their culture. So there you have it. Spartan life from brutal birth to inglorious old age, assuming you somehow survived the systematic attempt to kill you at every stage through battle, training, malnutrition, or social pressure. The next time someone proudly describes themselves or their workout regimen as Spartan, feel free to ask whether they also support infanticide, child abuse, state-sponsored rape, slave terrorism, and systematic cruelty to the elderly and disabled. After all, these weren't unfortunate side effects of the Spartan system, but integral, intentional components of the social machine that produced those famous warriors. The modern romanticization of Sparta represents one of history's most successful selective editing jobs, transforming a brutal, ultimately failed social experiment into an aspirational brand for protein powder and obstacle course races. If the actual historical Spartans could see how we've cherry-picked their legacy, they'd probably respond with appropriately laconic disdain. Soft. And they'd be right. We are softer than they were. We're also healthier, longer-lived, more innovative, more productive, and significantly less likely to collapse due to inability to adapt to changing conditions. Perhaps instead of selectively admiring Sparta, we should be grateful we've developed societies that don't require throwing imperfect babies off cliffs to function properly. Now that's what I call progress.